accident. Today, you should probably know, we're having Stephen and Felix from Microsoft to give a talk on Microsoft's open source cooperation and such. So I think if you'd like to...
I thought you would have a...
Not really. Oh.
All right, well then,
Sure,
that sounds
great. Sorry. Sure, why not? Right? We can just...
I thought there was going to be fanfare, you know, like a drum roll, maybe some announcements that you have. But
Nah.
is it on? No. It's not on.
Mine is very on.
It's totally
Should be
on.
on.
Now it's on? Hello?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's on.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Might have turned it down a little bit too much.
Hi.
Your one's fine.
Cool.
What's yours?
Thank you.
All right, cool. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So hi, we are open source engineers. The reason we give this talk is sort of because we are open source engineers working inside Microsoft, which really means we're about 70 engineers, the total team now. We started doing this about a year ago. And our team doesn't have a product. We don't have any PMs. We pretty much spend all our days on GitHub trying to improve open source that we find out there and trying to make it more compatible with whatever we're trying to do. It's sort of the whole idea that if your software doesn't work well on Windows or doesn't work well on Azure or can in any way improve that we see beneficial to the greater community, then why not just do that, right? We have engineers, a lot of them, so we might as well have some of them spending time on engineering the last year.
So this is actually kind of an older number, but it's a little bit bigger now. So one of the awesome things is that Microsoft is open sourcing stuff left and right, metaphor, right? So we have things like Objective-C for Windows, you have like the .NET runtime, Azure Autores, which like makes SDK libraries in any language, some really cool stuff. And so all this stuff is, which way more to count, is going open source almost every day. So a lot of our developer products, things that are designed to make developers more capable. And pretty much all the things I can think of that's around that ecosystem is going open source, including .NET runtime, garbage collector, all that crazy stuff is now open source. And the crazy part is even the patents for that stuff is also granted, so you would also not even be afraid of being gone after because of some type of patent infringement. And then even the cooler number behind that is 160,000 forks, which, I mean, you could say, oh, maybe that's all Microsoft employees, but there's not that many engineers, not even like half of that actually working on even on GitHub. So that means that there's a lot of people in the community that's actually forking our code and contributing back to it. And one of the coolest figures that we have is like, for example, and I used to work on .NET runtime, and they open source core CLR, which is the smaller bit of the actual big common language runtime. And it took about 3 days for someone to go ahead and take that code and make it run on OS X and Linux and send pull requests back, which is pretty impressive. So that's kind of a really awesome figure that we have. And I think the cooler part is that although Microsoft is open sourcing a lot of things outwards as a release channel, our actual job is kind of different. It's almost in reverse. And I think is there a next slide that talks about that?
Yeah, so the idea in general is, and maybe we can take one of the Linux examples, the general idea is that engineers today, many of us work on stuff that doesn't necessarily impact the product our company is selling. Most of the time it's something completely unrelated, right? Like virtually everybody who works in DevOps ever has tried to solve the same problems across companies, just generally speaking for the whole industry, right? And great example is if you take something like Slack and GitHub, both of these companies have a lot of engineers figuring out how to send notifications to operating systems, how to work with a networking stack in like a multi-system environment. And I think we now have the technology, as dumb as it sounds, with GitHub and all those GitHub, Slack, Skype, whatever you have, Google Hangouts, right? We now have the technology for diverse groups to collaborate very effectively. We may have had that for a few years, but we finally see it at a point where we see companies collaborating on a daily basis without constantly having people fly back and forth, which is super exciting. And I think one of the standard examples here would be the I don't know if you heard that Microsoft now has its own teeny tiny Linux distribution. It's nothing major. It's mostly for the network switches that power Azure. But those were that was worked out in a working group, right? Together with Cisco, Red Hat, Ubuntu, SUSE. Basically, it's not really. It's like a networking stack, Linux, right? It's not exactly what you would expect. You can't really install it in your notebook, specifically for certain routers. But while that thing was worked out, at the same time, we developed an open standard that is now the default standard for the Open Computing Working Group. Open Computing, I'm pretty sure. Does anybody know do people know the Open Computing Group? Yeah. So it's a thing that Facebook was super active in the beginning. It's essentially the idea that we standardize the way components in data centers collaborate together. So in the case that we built specifically we're moving towards, this is already a segue, we're moving towards a future where the actual switch, the network switch, and the software that is powering the switch are sort of becoming two independent pieces. And it's becoming more and more common that companies buy a switch and then throw the default software away and then write some software for it. And we have now a default and standard accepted API layer between switch and the software that is running it, so that people can essentially build operating systems for switches, right? That's sort of the idea. So if you install Ubuntu on your machine and it is an x86 processor, you don't also have to figure out how to talk to that processor. That used to be the time for switches. But now, thanks to like a standard hardware API, you no longer have to. That is essentially one of the things that came out of them. And that is a typical piece, right? Nobody at Microsoft cares if somebody else is using the same code. In fact, we really, really appreciate that, because then we don't have to worry about doing that ever again. We have done it once, and if this thing now lies on multiple shoulders, we're sort of done. We do have a few examples of why we're actually in the country, just to explain to you guys what we do and why we do it. There are 3 small examples, and do you want to take the first one?
So we're not just here like we on vacation or anything. We actually, although our boss might think we are, she had used that term.
She's convinced, yeah.
We're trying to convince her otherwise. So we came from San Francisco. We caught wind of a company, really cool company called Drawboard, and you might have heard of them. They make like the best PDF reader for Windows, and so their app actually was lucky enough, and not lucky, it was an awesome app that's recognized by the Windows team. And the Windows team said, hey, we're going to pre-install your app on every single Surface device that we sell. So that includes the regular Surface, the Surface Pro, the Surface Book, and the Surface Hub. It's 4 devices that we're launching this holiday season. And so their app is launching on each one of these devices, and they have this one component which is a radio menu, kind of like if you remember OneNote, if you ever used it before, there's a radio menu in the modern version back when like Windows 8 launched. So probably no one's heard of it because no one used those apps very frequently. But the point is that there's a menu that was in there and they wanted something similar, and their version always crashed because it was closed source. They had a vendor that they bought it from. They couldn't really modify or do anything with it. So we caught wind of that, and we decided that we create a component that's very similar to that, to what they had in the in-place replacement. So we came over and we built this radio component that you see behind me specifically for Drawboard, and we created it in a very general way so that anybody else who wants to use this component, they can. So we built it for them with a contingency that we would open source at MIT, so that essentially anybody else who wants to create an application and make money with it or do whatever with it can grab this code, which is quality code that's shipped with a production app for every single Surface device, and put it in their own app and benefit from it as well. Which kind of defines what our team does, which is partnering with, exemplary partners to enable them and also enable other people while they're at it in a very open source way.
Yeah, but it's sort of the simplest example. It doesn't really encompass this whole collaboration piece, right? Because we built it and then gave it someone. Ta-da. What is a little bit more interesting are the scenarios where we start working with other components and other people. How many of you have heard of Electron? Nobody? Cool. It's not dramatic, but Electron is essentially a wrapper around Chromium. How many of you have heard of GitHub, Slack, Mapbox, Ninite, Atom, the editor? Come on, guys. You have heard of one of these things. You've heard of GitHub, right?
All of these apps on Windows or Mac or Linux, right?
Thank you. Okay, a few hands. So anyway, all of these apps use Electron, which is a framework around Chrome, which is a browser I hope you've heard of. It's a browser which also exists in open source version Chromium. So Electron is essentially a wrapper around Chromium, And then it takes Node.js. It actually takes Io.js, but since we forked again, it's Node.js now. It's taking Node.js, Chromium, builds a wrapper around it, and enables the JavaScript process inside Chromium to directly interact with the Node.js JavaScript thread, allowing you to, from your browser window, to call essentially operating system APIs, right, if you go through Node.js, which is pretty cool. So with that said, you sort of have this shell where you can build applications. And if you ever wondered how GitHub, SLUG, GitHub's Atom, Visual Studio Code, all these applications, all these applications can run on Windows, Mac, and Linux at the same time, and also update virtually the same day. That's how. It's all essentially JavaScript in a browser. So we faced a pretty simple issue. Was essentially Azure Blob Storage. Access to that from both Linux as well as Mac OS was somewhat difficult. However, we do have all these open source components, right? We have a full SDK that is open source, and we just took that Electron, Ember, JavaScript, a little bit of Babelify, munched it all together, and over the course of a few weeks, we're able to build this Explorer. Wood itself, kind of cool. We solved an issue by using a bunch of open source, but the interesting piece is, and that is what we're going to do right when we come back. We have a few issues. All of these applications, all of SLUG, Visual Studio Code, GitHub, Atom. I keep forgetting the name of the Facebook IDE. Is it something with an N?
I have one. I just forgot the name.
Yeah, so Facebook has an IDE. I don't know why, but they decided that they need to fork Atom. They're at liberty. Anyway, all of these applications have common issues around notifications, talking to the registry. Notifications are really only hard because we have so many operating systems. A bunch of low-level system APIs that differ dramatically across all three systems. So anyway, all of us have the same trouble. So we're just going to get into one room and hack it out together so we can all go back home, and Slack can focus on building a great chat client. We can focus on building a great Visual Studio Code, and GitHub can focus on building a great code repository. And that is sort of the core idea, the very core idea. And this is our example how this whole open sourcing thing goes round robin. Because what we encountered every now and then is that people come up and like, so is this all a marketing stunt? Are you just doing open source because we were so pissed off? It is really that there's like value in this for the company, like actual monetary value, the thing that we all as engineers seem to hate, but there's a bottom line. And that is the example that we have. Have you guys heard of HoloLens? Yes. Nodding heads. It's essentially like a computer you wear on your face. Gives you holograms in the building. It's pretty cool. Super cool to wear. Anyway, there always used to be something called Mono, which is an open source version of C# and .NET. Has its own compiler. Is managed by the .NET Foundation. Great stuff. Mono is used by Unity 3D, which is the biggest 3D engine. If you ever played a game on your phone, it was probably 3D. And if it was 3D, it was definitely Unity. The statistical chances of it not being Unity are very, very low. So if you build games in Unity, you most likely build them in C# using Mono. Now that we open source .NET, we could put a lot of stuff that used to be exclusive to the Microsoft version of .NET back into Mono. So Mono and the big .NET can now live side by side. It's like happy little siblings with the same code base, which allowed us as Microsoft to use Mono much more in Visual Studio. We can now use Visual Studio to compile and build and run Mono, which means that Unity is now shipping with Visual Studio. Since that integration is already working super well, Unity is also the main way you build, excuse me, the main way you build applications for the HoloLens, which is kind of cool, right? So the HoloLens is essentially running the open source version of C#, which is super exciting for us because we don't have to build a great 3D engine. We can just use Unity. Everybody already knows how that works. And even better, we can do things like tell people, you can build Unity, you can build HoloLens apps today. Just build a Windows Unity app. It's gonna run. It's gonna run just fine. We also have this slide.
Well, it was just running C#, by the way. There is no open source version of C#.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's just C#. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then this slide is basically a hodgepodge. And it's not even all the things, right? But so the idea is that the way that we create business value for our company, but as well as contribute back to the community and kind of collaborate with all these different things that are out in, and we have to actually work with all these diverse different environments, is by integrating to a lot of these things. And so a lot of things, for example, like I'll just pick out, like, for example, you could do Visual Studio integration to Android apps. You can actually deploy and debug an Android phone and app, like on the actual native device to Visual Studio, which is pretty neat. You can do the same thing with iOS as well, albeit that you do need a Mac for the debugging server. You can still breakpoint into Objective-C running on an iOS device, which is really, really awesome too. Going into like other things like, for example, there's a ton of Linux technologies and a ton of different Linux containerizations, for example, like Docker, as well as orchestration. And on top of that, you have like provisioning infrastructure like Chef, Puppet, those types of things we've integrated into our cloud platform to make it so that our cloud is so open that you can just bring what you want without necessarily having to have an opinion on what you run. For example, you can bring Kubernetes if you really want to, if that's what you're used to running. But if you're also used to running Docker Swarm, then you could do that as well. You don't necessarily have to pick the thing that you want. We've been working very hard for the last couple of years doing outward integrations. For example, Rita, who just stepped out, and I just did integration.
She's right there.
Oh, she's here. I thought she stepped out. We just did integration of Cloud Foundry, which is an open source project that even like IBM Bluetooth runs, and we made it run on Azure, so that other companies that want to run that type of workload on Azure can do it if they want to. Otherwise, they can pick something else. And there's a lot of other examples as well, but the point is that the whole big movement of change inside this company, which obviously is nothing new to this type of audience, right? You know, to explain the importance of open source, but the point is that Microsoft has really kind of turned a 180 as far as what our priorities are and how we do business, especially how we monetize our value in open source, but as well as contribute back and partner with other organizations and other companies.
Oh yeah, we should maybe mention some of those things. Like we have a fantastic Android emulator at this point, which in benchmarks sort of outperforms the native Google one. It is about as good as all the other ones you can buy for money, but ours is free. Visual Studio is free.
Community edition, yeah. Like that just came out to Visual Studio Community. You can use that for Android apps, which is cool.
Yeah, and one of 4 servers that we run on Linux, which Microsoft has a lot of them, right? We have this Azure thing, so we have like millions of computers, and 1 in 4 of them run Linux, so we do have a fairly big Linux cluster at this point. But yeah, so long story short, the reason we're doing this tour obviously is for like multiple reasons. Number one is we want people to know that we do this open source thing now, because every now and then you find like someone who is like, hey, so is this Azure thing running anything besides Windows Server 2003, or is that right? So we just want to raise a little bit of awareness, but we also want to invite people to do more open source in general. Quick question to the group: how many people have ever submitted a pull request? 4. Linux runs on pull requests, you guys. And it's so much fun, really. I actually promise you, if any of you code, submitting pull requests is so much fun. And the more important piece is that open source is not just code. Documentation is super important. If you can document your favorite way of running Linux, that is definitely an open source contribution. Reporting issues is super, super duper important. So it doesn't just have to be code. But yeah, the main reason we are here is to see if any of you have any questions that we can maybe answer about pretty much anything Microsoft is doing today. Don't ask me anything about Microsoft pre-2010, which is when I joined. Yeah. But yeah, if you have any questions about anything we're doing right now, especially engineering related, that would be great.
Hello.
Hi.
So you're already having some for the HoloLens. I know in San Francisco you're already showing the HoloLens. There is nothing for Australia. Not even in 2016, not even your partner from Microsoft. So I want to know, when are you planning to come here?
Yeah. So the difficult thing is I have no idea when. The only thing I can promise you is that it's not because we hate the rest of the world. It's just that there's very limited numbers. And it turns out building like a teeny tiny computer that does 3D and spatial scanning is really, really hard.
Fits on your head, that's small. Right.
Doesn't have fans at all. It's really, really difficult. So that's the major reason, essentially. Yeah. But I have no date, sadly.
Hey, so you only have a team of 7 people. I'm curious, inside the Microsoft hierarchy, who do you report to?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. We should have mentioned that. So as far as developers are concerned, there's essentially 3 major groups inside Microsoft. There is something called DevDiv, which builds developer tools, and there is something called C&E, which I'm just going to call Azure here because that is really what
Cloud and enterprise.
Yeah, Azure, which is essentially all the cloud tools, and then there's something called DX, which is developer experience, which tries to take all the tools they build and turn that into something that doesn't suck. we are in that team. The let's make things not suck team.
Yeah, if you want to like, so those teams are actually kind of, it's crazy how, if you really want to know about it, but it's crazy how we actually pretty far organizationally, but we actually work very closely together. I actually came from that development team, that div. We actually report to our Kevin Turner's our COO. We operate to our, we actually report to our COO. We actually don't report to the same team, the same executive as the product teams. So technically we're under sales, but we're not really salespeople. We have no metrics like that. So if that's of interest, so we don't really sell things at all, actually, which is really interesting when it comes to like organizational like emails and things like that, because we don't care about most of it because we don't sell things. Right?
It's also pretty hard because we keep having to justify to salespeople why we spend so much money.
Yeah.
It's really hard to run a team inside a sales org that generates $0 in revenue.
We're never a good sales work.
Hi, what kind of license applies to the projects that you guys are kicking out?
MIT. We really like MIT for a bunch of reasons, but the most important one is that you can't really sue us, and you have the sort of the guarantee that we are not going to sue you over patents, which is really nice. So big fans of the MIT, also because we can just latch it on, we're sort of done with it. For anything bigger, we usually need quite a bit of legal help.
Any more questions?
Like anything, really, if you have any questions about Microsoft at all.
I have a question.
Sure.
The mono stuff, how much of .NET is being open source? Is it all of it, or is...
Well, okay. It's not all of it, but it's...
You keep saying, I think that is really confusing though. Like,
Yeah,
all of
well-
it that is not part of Windows.
Well, yeah, basically all of it's not part of Windows, because it's, remember, .NET framework, or everything .NET was a lot of Windows-specific stuff, like serial drivers and a lot of stuff in the framework. And even in the core CLR itself, there's a lot of stuff that, or in the CLR itself, there's a lot of stuff that was just extra. And so they basically slimmed it into core CLR, and they open sourced that, which is essentially, if you look online, core CLR is just an if-def version of CLR. So there's no reason why you couldn't take the whole CLR and build it. It's just that what we actually ship and produce and actually maintain is core CLR for Windows apps, for .NET 5 apps, those types of things. And so everything is open source. When I say that, it just means that what is officially open source is the core CLR, not the entire thing. Just because of we're not investing in legacy software.
Yeah, it is what we are running today. Whereas older versions of .NET used to have things like, oh, I'm going to talk to serial directly, which really doesn't make sense on Linux, right? And will probably result in major fails. So, yes, as far as a layman is concerned, all of it that we are running today.
C# compiler, runtime, everything. Libraries.
I have one question about Xamarin and Mono, because Mono is supposed to be open source, as you say, but also Daniel and Casa, when they develop with Xamarin, they develop with Mono for Mac and Mono for iOS and Mono for Android. So what's happening there? What is the license, or how is Xamarin working with Mono?
Are you saying Xamarin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you want to?
Sure. Like for example, I believe they use the Roslyn compiler now, like which is a new C# compiler, which is way better than the old compiler for either .NET or for Mono. As far as Xamarin, so Xamarin came from like the company that made Mono.
Yeah.
Like that's where they come from, right? And we've worked closely together with both of them. And so the Mono Foundation and Xamarin are kind of two different things. Obviously they're associated. A lot of the code from CLR has made it into Mono. And slowly, I mean, it's starting to converge, but they're not exactly the same thing just yet. So essentially, all the open source .NET stuff is directly impacting the quality of Xamarin as well, and also bringing more feature parity between the two runtimes and between the two compilers and development stacks. Whether or not your experience will be that much different, maybe not, because if you imagine Mono or Xamarin is just selling a native development experience with a different language stack, but with the same API stack. So, you know, on iOS, you're only getting base class libraries, which are the same. Everything else is going to be, you know, NS whatever, or, you know, Android. I forgot the namespaces there, so for that too.
Yeah. Did that answer your question? Was that what you were looking for?
No.
Okay,
That's
cool.
what I was looking for.
I missed what you said. You said something about 1 in 4 computers running Linux. Too?
Yeah. So most of I can explain that in detail. So we have a product called Azure, which is essentially AWS, but from Microsoft. Has been around for virtually forever, but it's one of the major cloud providers. We're fairly big at this point. It is currently one of our major sources of income is that we run computers for others, but essentially a cloud. 1 in 4 of them are Linux. We specialize quite heavily in running Linux on the cloud, doing that very effectively, and especially running your own stack. So the core idea here is that we're pretty damn good at running whatever stack you have. We partner with every single Linux distributor that has ever created some kind of commercial entity. Every single one of them, Red Hat, Ubuntu, SUSE, they all provide special versions for Azure, optimize them for Azure, make sure that it all runs really well. And then the thing Stephen alluded to is if you want to run a specific stack on top of that, we usually also support all of those. And that results in about 1 in 4, that's currently our customer number, 1 in 4 of the machines that we are running Linux, which is millions, obviously. So I thought it was just a cool number because we're talking to the Linux user group, and somebody might wonder, what does Microsoft know about running Linux? I just want to point out quite a bit. We run millions of them all the time.
Yeah, even a few years ago, we were the top contributor to the Linux kernel. And today, we're one of the top ones, but we're not the top anymore. There was a big amount of work that we had to do to get the kernel to work with Hyper-V very well, so that we could virtualize Linux in the cloud. So we did a lot of work to do that to make things kind of work together.
Yeah, I thought it was just a cool number for people to know. I like to give it out, right?
So when you say it's 1 in 4 in Azure, you're talking about your customers. Customer service.
But yeah, even in
does Windows themselves, Microsoft themselves?
Well, yeah, like take Skype, take Yammer. Those 2 acquisitions and a couple others that we have acquired, they run Linux stacks as well. Like Yammer, for example, runs Ruby with a few other microservices, but all their stuff is Linux.
Our networking stack is Linux,
yeah,
right?
Their whole Linux stack too, and then the same thing as Skype. So we don't acquire them. It used to be a time that we did that, where Hotmail is the biggest one, where we acquire and say, okay, let's throw all your things out, let's get on Windows. But we don't do that anymore. So yeah, they're currently we have internal products that are running on Linux.
Yeah.
Can you expand a bit on that relationship you have in kernel development?
It's easy. So if you actually just look at the commit histories, the commit history of like Linux kernel contributions, you could just grab by like at Microsoft.com, and you'll see a lot of the engineers that essentially send the request to upstream for Linux kernel, and then it gets approved by maintainers for the kernel. But you'll see a lot of fixes where it's like you have to change this very esoteric variable in order to prevent time skew or something like that.
Yeah, it's usually small things.
Yeah.
I think that's my favorite bug that we have had in Azure is that for certain VMs, giving certain conditions, at some point, if running in a hypervisor, clocks would be off by like a fraction of a millisecond a day, which is fine for like a day, a month, but like very quickly, suddenly clusters are like...
It's not fine for a week, but it gets pretty bad.
Yeah, things like that.
It's very esoteric things that you hit, and you don't see that because we're doing something unique inside our data center where we're running Hyper-V with Linux, and sometimes those 2 technologies don't work as well as they should. Yeah. So then we spend a lot of money into making that work, which is a common thing.
Yeah, and the hypervisor specifically, if you're wondering what we mostly contribute to the hypervisor, it's the concept of giving an operating system access to, a virtualized operating system access to bare metal resources with the littlest amount of overhead, and that is usually a hypervisor, and in our case it's Hyper-V. That is how we run stuff, that is how Windows runs containers and everything else. So that is most of the power there, right? If you have something that is compatible with Windows, and you want to virtualize Linux.
Which is great, because then that means all the distros will get it at some point, and they all work, which is really nice.
So does that include like pseudo drivers and things like that, like pseudo?
Yeah,
they call it para-virtualized hardware and things like that.
Yeah, well, you need that, right? Because if we're going to attach this, if we're going to attach devices to these things, I don't know exactly what the commits are to like the effort that's gone to make those things work, but they're not post a lot of work or real work. It's all public though, so I'm sure we can still get up. But it's related around those things so that we can do things like attach a Windows disk to a Windows machine, attach a disk to also a Linux machine in the same portal, and have things all work at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about more desktop type stuff like Microsoft Office and things like that? I know that LibreOffice and OpenOffice have been getting a lot of documentation from Microsoft these days, and how is that going? Because I know they were originally forced to do it by the European Union, but I'm assuming things are more, I've heard things are quite cooperative these days.
So we do have the open file formats, right? But in addition to that, as far as the Microsoft effort is concerned, I think there's, at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. Okay, here's an important piece of thought. Microsoft is in, I think, opposition to many other companies. The way we're organized is with a huge amount of independence. So if you look at something like Office can very gladly and happily join the Apple conference, WWDC, and say, oh, iPad Pro seems like a really nice device. We're launch partners. Office is now an iPad Pro, right? So with that in mind, if you ignore for a moment that Windows and Office are both from Microsoft, the way Office usually operates is that they do what's best for their customers, right? They want to do what's best for their Office customer. At the point where it makes sense to build Office for Linux, they probably would, right? They're not going to throw away money. However, I think market share is just not there, right? And I don't see it being there in the immediate future.
I was mainly talking about LibreOffice gets documentation on how the document docx and all that sort of work, and like Samba is also,
Yeah.
I'm assuming those sorts of documentation are provided in bulk these days, or?
Yeah. So you can look it all up. They're all put under a standard. Even C# is just an ECMA standard at this point. So we do submit it with the usual boards and the usual EEE certificates. So all our file formats at this point are totally open source. I mean, it's a specification, right? But once you have a clean specification, your file formats are so much better, right?
Well, it doesn't mean they're better. I mean, if you look at the virtual hard disk specification, it's definitely open.
Okay, sure, yeah, fine. We do have some horrible ones. But in the case of Office, I would argue that XML is a lot better than a bunch of binary because it's text, right? So yeah, we do, all of that stuff is open. So anybody that wants to implement their own word reader can totally go ahead and do so. I mean, it's not just that we don't mind, we really appreciate that.
So is Office Read, the latest versions of Office Read ODT and ODS files?
Sorry, what?
The latest versions of Office Read ODT and ODS files?
I don't even know what those files are, to be honest.
ODS, open document format.
It's the text version and the spreadsheet version.
I don't know, want to find out?
Do you want to try?
Oh, wait, let me quickly...
It's what LibreOffice uses by default. It's what all the other Office packages use by default.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
yeah, I really have no idea. But
there's no technical reason to fit it, but
let's find out, right? So...
Can you sort by file too? I don't think you have one hanging around.
Well, I've got some.
Somebody give me a file.
ext4, would you?
No.
OTF?
Can't do ext4 either.
So it's OTF, right? Is it OTF or what was it?
ODT and ODS.
Open document format.
Yeah, ODF.
That's the Costello.
So there's a.
I don't know what this document is, but let's see what happens.
So you can't read ext4?
No, I don't think OS X reads ext4. Sure. Because I had to specifically spin up a Linux machine in order to read one before.
Yeah, I'm going to say it seems like at least the Mac version can't. Yeah.
Oof. That's a disaster. Nope.
Well, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I didn't local government in Munich specify open ADF formats. Surprised.
I know it's.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's probably just, here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, somebody's sitting in a room, it's like, how long does it take us to implement that format? And then somebody's like, this many hours. And then somebody else is like, cool, how many people need that? And then somebody, yeah, right?
When Microsoft came up with ODX, DocX or whatever, and made it an open format or whatever, they did it in direct competition to ODF.
I think they also did it because someone forced them to legally. So I wouldn't.
Microsoft was originally contributing, involved in ODF,
Yeah.
and then they decided to do DocX instead. And there was a bit of controversy over that.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, it's Office. It's not really DevTools, so we're pretty far away from that. But yeah, you can basically. I think all of these decisions usually make sense once you think about the fact that nobody there really wants anything else to burn. There's no evil people. There's just people with a calculator who have to pay engineers to do work.
I'll take one more question because we actually do need to run pretty soon, but I'm sure.
Okay, so you mentioned about doing stuff for the benefit of customers. Can you ever see kind of a position where Microsoft might end up kind of like a Red Hat company with an open source Windows that customers still pay for, so that developers can develop extensions and drivers a bit easier? I mean, obviously you're not the guy in charge of that.
Yeah, I can just repeat what my bosses usually say to questions like that, which is we're discussing all of that a lot, which is true. We're discussing all of that a lot, right? The benefits and upsides and downsides of open sourcing stuff. The trouble we have with open sourcing anything that has been around for a while is most of the time, and I usually try to describe that with like a plant metaphor, that Microsoft for the longest time has been this company where everybody was assumed to work at the company, be paid for the company, everything's connected. And if you think, for instance, about building Windows, Linux is very modular. Building Linux yourself is sort of easy. Building Windows takes forever if you don't have a supercomputer. It's like a really big thing, right? And the trouble we have is that for the longest time, engineering was made with the assumption that somebody else has, in theory, unlimited resources to look at your code, understand your code. Whenever we grab anything that is sort of older, we grab it and usually we have like this whole web of roots attached to it that lead to places that we didn't mean to open source, that maybe we're not legally allowed to open source, right? That's the typical thing of like video formats. And that usually gets really, really messy really quickly.
There's also the challenge that Red Hat sells an enterprise developer product, right? Like when you look at Windows, it is a mass consumer product as well as a developer product. And the problem is that aside from the legal problem as well, but when you think about from that perspective, if you do open source Windows, then you open yourself up to having multiple versions of many forks of Windows. And if you're trying to, depending on the model of what you're trying to do, like you have Apple on one side, you have like Android on the other side, which you have very different models, right? And being able to fork and create different versions of Windows. For example, you can imagine the bad things that can happen and the great things that can happen. And there could be a loss of consistency there for at least the consumer experience.
We had a major backlash when the start button didn't read start anymore, but became an icon.
Yeah. So can you
Think
imagine
about that.
like that? That's the challenge that you have, and I don't think it's ready for that. And I think that's the reason why it's that very reason it's such a consumer product. That trying to keep consistency there is also very challenging if you make a completely open product.
However, I also think that it would become far more likely if somebody, can be us, can be someone else, figures out how to do open source for the consumer, because I don't think anybody has so far, right? Look, I don't think that the Linux community was not great or smart enough to build an operating system that is well regarded by consumers. I think it was just to this point impossible. I don't think it's like a, for the lack of trying, that's the one thing. And I don't think it's a surprise that Linux is one of the most, probably currently the most popular server system amongst hardcore power users who really exactly know what they want to do. Sort of the mechanical keyboard crowd, right? And I don't think that you can go and be like, oh, if only the Linux people were more smart, then finally it would run on consumers' computers, right? It was not for the lack of trying. And I think even to like tiny products, if you look at something like Android, I don't think it's a surprise that somebody like Google swooped in and took this with like an iron fist and led it with basically a lot of passion, right, and a lot of ideas and a lot of closed code, and took this to be consumer ready. I think if anybody ever figures this out, my job is going to be so much more exciting as open source engineer. Somebody figures out how to do open source for consumers.
Yeah.
Cool. Rita is indicating that we're probably going to get a ticket any second now. So our car is currently not, our parking spot is currently not being paid for. Thank you very much for entertaining us. We're probably going to run out this door any minute now. Rita, do you want to lead the run?